The deck was already burning when he made the decision. Not the kind of decision men debate. Not the kind commanders approve. This was the kind of choice that flashes through the mind in a single violent heartbeat. Act now or watch everything die. Flames rolled across the flight deck of the USS Enterprise like a living thing, fed by jet fuel, oxygen and chaos. Aircraft sat parked wing to wing, each one a floating bomb. Ammunition cooked off beneath the steel. Men were screaming orders that no one could hear. Alarms howled. Smoke erased the horizon. And in the middle of it all stood a machinist. He wasn't a pilot. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't trained for heroics or headlines. His job was metal, engines, routine, fixing what others flew. But on this day on this deck, routine had already died. He looked at the parked aircraft nearest the fire. Then he jumped. No clearance. No helmet. No guarantee he would live another 10 seconds. To anyone watching, it looked suicidal. To history, it would become the reckless move that saved one of the most powerful warships ever built. The USS Enterprise was more than a ship. She was a symbol, the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, a floating city of steel and reactors, carrying nearly 5,000 souls and enough firepower to level a coastline. In the late 1960s, she prowled the Pacific as part of America's massive naval presence during the Vietnam War. But for all her power, she had one fatal weakness: fire. On a carrier, fire is never small. Every aircraft carries fuel measured in tons. Every deck hides bombs, rockets, and missiles designed to explode. One spark in the wrong place doesn't start a blaze, it starts a chain reaction. That chain reaction had already begun. A sudden explosion ripped across the deck, followed by another. Heat warped steel. Tires detonated. Shrapnel tore through men who moments earlier were performing routine checks. The fire leapt from plane to plane, racing toward the heart of the carrier. Damage control teams ran toward the flames, knowing full well what waited inside them. Some would never come back. And still, the worst hadn't happened yet. Because several aircraft sat fully fueled, fully armed, and perfectly positioned to turn disaster into annihilation. If those planes ignited, if even one detonated, the explosions could punch through the flight deck, breach internal compartments, and trigger a nightmare scenario no commander ever wants to imagine. The Enterprise didn't need to be sunk to be lost. She only needed to burn long enough. The machinist saw what others didn't. He noticed the direction of the flames. The way the heat bent toward a specific aircraft. The way fuel pooled beneath its fuselage. The ticking clock no one had time to say out loud. That aircraft was a parked jet, engines cold, controls idle but loaded with fuel and weapons. If the fire reached it, the blast wouldn't stay on the deck. It would tear through the ship. He understood machines. He understood fire. And he understood one brutal truth. That plane had to move. But there was no pilot inside. No time to fetch one. No time to follow procedure. Every second of hesitation fed the flames. So he did the unthinkable. He climbed into the cockpit. The canopy was hot to the touch. Smoke poured over the frame. The air inside burned his lungs as soon as he dropped into the seat. Alarms screamed, not for him but for everything failing at once. He wasn't trained to fly combat missions. But he knew enough. Enough to start an engine. Enough to release brakes. Enough to aim a plane away from a firestorm. Outside, men waved frantically, some shouting for him to stop, others realizing too late what he was trying to do. If the jet exploded while he was inside, there would be nothing left of him to recover. The engines whined. The aircraft shuddered. Flames licked at the wings. He shoved the throttle forward. To the men watching, it looked insane. A single jet rolling across a burning deck. No clearance lights. No catapult. No safety crews in place. Just a machinist, choking on smoke, steering several tons of explosive metal through chaos. Debris slammed into the fuselage. Heat blistered paint. For a moment, it seemed impossible that the aircraft wouldn't detonate. But it didn't. He guided it away from the cluster of parked planes. Away from the ammunition. Away from the heart of the ship. And when he finally cut the engines and scrambled out, collapsing onto the deck, the fire followed a different path. A weaker path. A survivable one. That reckless jump didn't end the disaster. Men still fought flames for hours. Injuries mounted. Lives were lost. Steel was scarred and twisted beyond recognition. But the carrier lived. The reactors remained intact. The flight deck held. And the chain reaction, the one that could have turned the USS Enterprise into a floating tomb, never reached its final link. Most of the crew would never know the machinist's name. There would be no dramatic announcement over the loudspeakers. No medals handed out on a burning deck. In the official reports, his action would be a line item, a maneuver amid hundreds of others. But without it, the story of that day would have ended very differently. This is not a story about glory. It's a story about a split second. About a man who understood machines better than fear. And about how one reckless jump into a parked plane changed the fate of the USS Enterprise forever. The fire aboard the USS Enterprise did not begin with drama. There was no warning speech. No countdown. No moment when someone shouted that history was about to happen. It began the way most naval disasters do, quietly, suddenly, and without mercy. On the flight deck, routine ruled the morning. Aircraft were parked in tight formation, wings folded, noses angled precisely as deck crews had practiced 1,000 times before. Jet fuel lines snaked across steel. Weapons crews moved carefully among bombs and missiles designed for distant targets, not the men standing beside them. Then a single flash changed everything. An explosion tore through the forward section of the deck. Whether it was ignited fuel, overheated equipment, or a chain reaction no one could later agree on mattered little in that moment. What mattered was what followed. Fire spread faster than human reflex. Within seconds, thick black smoke swallowed visibility. Flames raced along fuel trails, leaping toward aircraft that sat helpless and silent. Heat cracked metal and turned paint into vapor. Tires exploded like artillery rounds, sending fragments screaming across the deck. The USS Enterprise had trained for fire. But training assumes space. This deck had none. Aircraft carriers are engineered miracles, but they are also engineered risks. Every jet is a container of fuel. Every bomb is an argument waiting to be finished. Every missile is a promise of destruction. When fire enters that equation, math becomes irrelevant. Damage control teams poured onto the deck wearing silvered suits, hauling hoses toward walls of flame that felt alive. Some were blown backward by secondary explosions. Others vanished into smoke so thick it erased shape and distance. Below deck, alarms echoed through passageways. Compartments sealed. Medical teams prepared for casualties they knew were coming. The captain faced a decision no commander wants to make: save the ship or abandon it. But abandoning a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is not like abandoning any other vessel. The Enterprise carried reactors. If fire reached critical areas, evacuation would not be an option. Would be too late. On the flight deck, chaos sharpened into something worse: inevitability. As flames advanced, the danger was no longer the fire itself. It was what the fire would reach next. Several aircraft sat loaded with fuel and ordnance, parked exactly where procedures demanded, but procedures had not imagined a deck already burning end to end. If those jets detonated in sequence, the blast could rip open the deck plating. Fire would pour into internal compartments. Ammunition storage could ignite. Structural integrity would fail. The Enterprise would not sink quickly. She would burn slowly. And thousands aboard would have nowhere to run. This was the moment the machinist acted. He had no grand view of the ship. He wasn't watching from the bridge or issuing commands from behind reinforced glass. He was on the deck. He felt the heat through his boots. He smelled burning insulation, fuel, and something far worse: flesh. He heard the concussions rattle steel beneath his feet. But he also saw patterns. Machinists are trained to notice systems under stress. They understand how failure travels, how one broken component pulls the next into collapse. He saw the fire bending toward a specific aircraft. He saw fuel pooling beneath it. He saw what would happen if it stayed where it was. No order came. No signal told him to move. There was only time, and almost none of it left. So he climbed in. The cockpit was never meant to be entered under these conditions. Smoke filled the canopy. Heat distorted instruments. The smell of fuel burned his throat with every breath. He forced himself to focus: switches, sequence, pressure. Outside, flames licked closer. Inside, the engine came alive. That sound, the rising whine, cut through chaos like a blade. It meant motion. It meant possibility. The jet began to roll. Every second mattered. What followed was not flying. It was survival. The machinist steered around wreckage and burning equipment, guiding the aircraft through a narrow corridor of fire and smoke. Crew members dove out of the way. Others stared, stunned, as several tons of fuel and explosives moved when nothing else could. The aircraft reached a safer distance. Not safe. Safer. He shut down the engine and ran. Moments later, the fire surged into the space the jet had occupied, and found nothing there to detonate. The chain reaction broke. The battle did not end. 4 hours, sailors fought the blaze compartment by compartment. Some collapsed from smoke inhalation. Others were injured by falling debris or secondary explosions. The deck was scarred beyond recognition. When the fire finally lost its strength aboard the USS Enterprise, it did not end with celebration. It ended with silence. A silence so heavy it felt unreal after hours of explosions, alarms, and shouted orders. The flight deck no longer burned, but it still radiated heat, as if the ship itself was remembering how close it had come to destruction. Smoke rose slowly into the sky, thin now, exhausted, the last breath of a disaster that refused to finish what it started. The deck was unrecognizable. Where sleek aircraft once stood, twisted metal lay scattered like bones. Paint had peeled away. Steel had warped under temperatures never meant to touch it. Every step echoed differently now, hollow and uncertain, as sailors moved carefully through the wreckage. Survival had arrived. Quietly. Medics worked without drama. Burned skin was wrapped. Oxygen masks pressed against faces darkened by soot and smoke. Some men sat in silence, staring at nothing, hands shaking now that adrenaline had released them. Others lay still, beyond help, covered respectfully as the living moved around them. Names were called. Some voices answered. Others never would again. Those moments were not recorded in official logs. They were not reduced to numbers or timelines. They lived only in the memories of the men who stood there, the cost paid so the ship could live. Below deck, officers confirmed what everyone feared to ask aloud. The reactors were secure. Critical compartments remained sealed. The ship was damaged, badly, but she was not lost. The difference between survival and catastrophe had been measured in minutes. In meters. In one decision that had never been part of any manual. In the days that followed, the USS Enterprise returned to controlled order. Repairs began immediately. Burned sections were cut away. Electrical systems were rebuilt wire by wire. Safety procedures were reviewed, rewritten, and questioned with a seriousness born from experience rather than theory. Official reports were thorough. They always are. They detailed ignition points, response times, equipment performance, and failures. Charts replaced smoke. Language replaced fear. Responsibility was assigned where it could be proven. And buried inside those documents was a brief reference to an action taken outside standard protocol. An aircraft moved. A fire redirected. A chain reaction broken. Nothing more. There were no ceremonies. No speeches delivered on the scorched deck. The Navy does not glorify chaos, even when chaos saves lives. The machinist did not step forward seeking recognition. He did not expect it. He understood something fundamental about disasters. They do not reward intentions, only outcomes. He had not acted to be remembered. He had acted because machines obey physics, not fear. And fire does not wait for permission. It is easy later to turn such moments into clean stories of heroism. To strip them of doubt. To remove the risk. But the truth is heavier. That jump into the cockpit could have failed. The aircraft could have exploded instantly. His decision might have changed nothing, except the number of names read during the aftermath. That is what makes the choice matter. He did not know the ending. He chose anyway. The Navy is built on discipline for a reason. Order saves ships. Procedure saves lives. Chains of command prevent panic from becoming disaster. But no system is designed for every possibility. There are moments when reality outruns rules, when events move faster than training can respond. In those moments, survival depends on people who understand when rules no longer match the danger in front of them. Not rebels. Professionals. The machinist was not thinking about glory or sacrifice. He was thinking about fuel, heat, pressure, and motion. He was thinking about what the fire would touch next, and what would happen if it did. He solved a mechanical problem. Only this time the machine was the ship itself. As the Enterprise sailed again, life aboard slowly returned to routine. New sailors joined the crew. Training resumed. Aircraft launched and landed as if the deck had never burned. But for those who had been there, something had changed. They remembered how fast the fire moved. How small the deck felt. How thin the margin between control and collapse truly was. Years later, when people spoke of the USS Enterprise, they spoke of power. The world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. A symbol of reach, strength, and technological dominance. They did not speak of smoke-filled cockpits. They did not speak of scorched steel. They did not speak of a machinist climbing into a parked aircraft while flames closed in. But that moment never left the ship. History often remembers disasters by their failures. Sinkings. Explosions. Losses measured in numbers too large to imagine. What history rarely remembers are the disasters that almost happened. The moments when catastrophe paused, hesitated, and stepped back. The fire aboard the USS Enterprise was one of those moments. A near erasure. A story that survived because someone interrupted it. The machinist's reckless jump was not defiance. It was clarity. An understanding that waiting would cost more lives than acting ever could. That kind of courage does not announce itself. It does not raise flags. It simply moves when everything else freezes. Every ship carries stories like this, unseen, uncelebrated, but essential. Stories that remind us that steel does not think. Systems do not choose. Technology does not decide who lives. People do. And sometimes, those people stand far from command rooms, wearing no rank that history will remember. On a burning flight deck, surrounded by fuel, fire, and fear, one machinist made a reckless jump into a parked plane. That single act redirected a disaster. It saved a ship. It preserved thousands of lives. And when the smoke cleared, history moved forward, unaware of how close it came to ending very differently. The USS Enterprise sailed on. So did the world. And in the silence left behind by the fire, that moment remains. A reminder that survival is often decided not by plans, but by people willing to act when plans no longer apply.